When the train doors closed in Chicago, I heard her voice again. The same voice my great-grandfather swore followed him from the Bell farm in Tennessee. She wasn't supposed to leave Adams. But she did. My name is Evelyn Bell, and for 32 years, I believed family legends were just that, legends. Stories passed down through generations like worn quilts, frayed at the edges, but still providing comfort on cold nights. I made my living as a freelance journalist, chasing down real stories with verifiable sources and documented evidence. I had no time for ghost tales, but 3 months ago, everything changed when I inherited the old Bell property in Adams, Tennessee. The farmhouse looked like something time had forgotten, weathered clapboards siding the color of old bone, windows dark as dead eyes, and a front porch that sagged under the weight of 2 centuries. Standing there with the deed in my hand, I felt the first whisper of cold air brush against my neck. Despite the sweltering August heat, "Welcome home, child," I spun around, but saw only the empty dirt road stretching back toward town. My rational mind catalogued the possibilities. Wind through the trees, a distant neighbor, my own imagination. But something deep in my bones recognized that voice, even though I'd never heard it before. That night, I called Dr. Marcus Grady, a paranormal researcher whose work I'd encountered during an article I'd written debunking supernatural tourism. Unlike the charlatans I usually encountered, Marcus approached his work with scientific rigor. When I told him about the Bell Witch case, his skepticism vanished. The Bell Witch is one of the few documented poltergeist cases in American history. He said over the phone, Andrew Jackson himself investigated it. But according to every historical record, Kate Batts, the entity calling herself the Bell Witch, disappeared in 1821. What if she didn't disappear? I asked, watching shadows move across the farmhouse walls despite the stillness of the night. What if she just scattered? The idea came to me like a memory that wasn't mine, the witch's presence fracturing like a broken mirror, each shard attaching itself to anyone carrying Bell blood. Marcus was intrigued enough to drive down from Nashville the next morning. I spent that night in the farmhouse, and that's when I first experienced Kate's true nature. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath misted in the air. Then came the knocking, not the typical 3 raps of folklore, but a systematic pounding that started in the walls and moved to the floorboards as if something was trying to claw its way up from beneath the house. "You can't stay here forever, Evelyn Bell." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a woman's voice thick with malice and something that might have been loneliness. "We have places to go, people to see." I grabbed my laptop and car keys and drove straight to the nearest motel, but she followed me there too. In the flickering light of the neon vacancy sign, I watched my reflection in the bathroom mirror stretch and distort, my face becoming older, more gaunt, my eyes hollow and knowing. That's when I understood. I wasn't just inheriting property. I was inheriting her, Doctor. Grady arrived the next morning with recording equipment and electromagnetic field detectors. He was a tall man with premature gray hair and the kind of intense focus that came from years of chasing things other people refused to believe in. We set up his equipment in the farmhouse parlor, and within minutes, his instruments were registering temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic anomalies. "This is unprecedented," he murmured, watching his tablet display spike and flutter. "Most poltergeist activity is localized, tied to specific locations or objects. But this," he looked at me with something between excitement and concern, "she's attached to you directly." As if summoned by his words, Kate made herself known. The air in the room turned frigid, and every piece of electronic equipment began screaming static. Then, through the white noise, came her voice. "Dr. Grady, still chasing. Ghosts, I see. Tell me, Doctor, what happens to a skeptic when the evidence walks right up and introduces itself?" Marcus went pale but kept his equipment running. Kate Batts, I presume. Laughter filled the room. Not heard but felt, like ice water in our veins. Kate will do. Though I've gone by so many names over the years. Every Bell child who's ever run. Screaming from shadows, every descendant who's woken up to voices in empty houses. I've been there, waiting, growing stronger. What do you want? I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The temperature plummeted further, and frost began forming on the windows. I want to go home, child, but first, there's someone I need to meet, someone who's been waiting for me almost as long. As I've been waiting for them, the room fell silent, except for the hum of Marcus's equipment. When I looked at him, his face had gone ashen. He knew something he wasn't telling me that afternoon. I made a decision that would haunt me for weeks. To come. I was leaving Tennessee, and I was taking Kate with me. Not by choice. I understood now that wherever I went, she would follow. But maybe, if I could figure out who she was looking for, I could find a way to end this. My first stop was Amarillo, Texas, where my cousin lived. I thought distance might weaken her influence. But I was wrong. If anything, the farther we traveled from Adams, the stronger she became. The Greyhound bus station in Amarillo was nearly empty when I arrived at 2 a.m. Just a handful of weary travelers waiting for connections. I'd barely taken a seat when the fluorescent lights began to flicker. The air conditioning unit gave a mechanical. Groaned and died, leaving us in humid silence. She's here, whispered an elderly man across from me, though I hadn't said a word about Kate to anyone. That's when I noticed that every person in the waiting area had stopped moving. They sat frozen in their chairs, eyes wide but unseeing, as if they were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Then, one by one, they began to move again. But wrong, like marionettes guided by a drunk puppeteer, a young mother lifted her hand to her throat and began to press, her fingers digging into her own flesh. A businessman in a wrinkled suit started beating his head against the vending machine with mechanical persistence. The elderly man who'd spoken began clawing it. His arms, long red furrows appearing under his fingernails. Stop. I screamed, but my voice seemed to come from very far away. Kate's laughter filled the station, echoing off the tile walls. They can hear me, Evelyn. Every one of them has a little Bell blood, distant cousins you've never met, the family tree. Spreads wider than you know. I ran from person to person, trying to break them free of whatever hold she had on them. When I touched the young mother's hands, pulling them away from her throat, she looked at me with my own eyes, not similar, but identical, and spoke in Kate's voice. You can't save them all. Child, there are so many of us now, so many scattered. Seeds of the Bell line. The spell broke suddenly, leaving the victims confused and injured. I called 911 and waited with them until the ambulances arrived, but I couldn't explain what had happened. How? Could I tell the paramedics that a witch had possessed my distant relatives and forced them to hurt themselves? That night, in a motel room in Amarillo, I called Marcus. He'd been researching the Bell family genealogy, and what he'd found chilled me more than Kate's presence ever had. Evelyn, the Bell line doesn't just extend through direct descendants, he said, his voice strained. Intermarriage, adoption, even illegitimate children. There are Bell bloodlines scattered across the entire country. Thousands of people with at least some genetic connection to the original family, and Kate can influence all of them? It appears so, but there's something else. I've been looking into historical records, and I found references to a Bell family member who left Tennessee in the 1820s, right around the time Kate supposedly disappeared, a young woman named Sarah. Bell who traveled west and was never heard from again. My blood went cold. You think Kate is looking for Sarah? I think Kate has been looking for Sarah for 200 years, and somehow you're leading her there. The next few days blurred together in a nightmare of constant travel and escalating supernatural attacks. Kate's influence grew stronger the farther west we went, as if we were approaching something she'd been seeking for decades. In Las Vegas, she manifested in the Desert Palms Diner at 3 a.m., a fluorescent-lit island in an ocean of neon darkness. I'd stopped for coffee and to plan my next move when every reflective surface in the place windows, chrome fixtures, even the coffee pot began showing the same image. A woman's shadow moving independently of any physical form. The shadow passed over each surface like an eclipse, and wherever it touched, people froze mid-motion. A waitress stood statue still with a coffee pot tilted in mid-pour, the stream of liquid hanging in the air like a brown icicle. A trucker at the counter had his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide and unblinking. I was the only person still moving, and in that silence, Kate's voice was clearer than it had ever been. Do you feel it, Evelyn? The pull? She's close now, so close I can taste her fear. What did Sarah do to you? I asked the empty air. The shadow in the chrome napkin dispenser turned toward me, and for a moment I could make out features a woman's face, twisted with centuries of rage and something that might have been heartbreak. She promised to take me with her, Kate whispered, and her voice carried a pain so raw it made my chest ache. When she left Tennessee, she promised I wouldn't be alone anymore, but she lied. She left me bound to that cursed farm, while she went to build a new life in a place I could never follow. Until now, the spell broke, and the diner came back to life as if nothing had happened. But I saw the look in the waitress's eyes, the same confusion and fear I'd seen in Amarillo. Kate was getting stronger, and her ability to influence people was spreading beyond family bloodlines. I left Las Vegas that night, driving east on Highway 40 through Oklahoma. That's where Kate showed me what she was truly capable of. The fog rolled in around midnight, thick and unnatural, reducing visibility to mere feet. Cars began stalling out along the highway, not just one or two, but dozens, their engines dying simultaneously, as if someone had thrown a switch. I pulled over and got out of my rental car, joining the confused drivers standing in the mist. That's when we heard the footsteps. They came from everywhere and nowhere, the sound of bare feet on asphalt. Walking between the stalled vehicles, the fog swirled and shifted, occasionally revealing glimpses of movement, a pale hand here, the hem of an old-fashioned dress there. Always just at the edge of vision. Sarah Bell? Kate's voice drifted through the mist, no longer coming from any particular direction, but seeming to rise from the road itself. I know you're here. I can smell the fear on you. Just like that night you abandoned me. A woman's scream echoed across the highway, high and desperate. It came from somewhere ahead of us, beyond the wall of fog, but it might as well have been from another world. She's here, I breathed, finally understanding. Sarah's here, isn't she? But as the fog began to clear, I realized the horrible truth. The scream hadn't come from some long-lost ancestor. It had come from a woman in her 70s. Standing beside a broken-down Buick about 50 yards ahead, she was staring at me with eyes full of terror and recognition. You brought her to me, the woman whispered as I approached. After all these years, you brought her home. Her name was Clara Jennings, and she was Sarah Bell's great-great-granddaughter. She'd been driving from Oklahoma City to visit family in Tulsa when her car died in the fog. But that wasn't coincidence. Kate had orchestrated this moment with the precision of a master puppeteer. Clara was a Tennessee historian who'd spent her entire career documenting local folklore. She knew about Kate, about the original Bell Witch case, and most importantly, she knew the truth about what Sarah Bell had done in 1821. Your ancestor made a pact with Kate, Clara told me as we huddled together beside her car, the fog still swirling around us like hungry spirits. Sarah was Kate's first host, the first Bell descendant the witch learned to inhabit, but Sarah found a way to break free, to trap Kate back at the farm while she escaped west. The ritual required a blood sacrifice, Sarah's own infant daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. She killed her own child? To save herself, yes, and Kate has been hunting the Bell line ever since, looking for Sarah or her descendants, seeking revenge for that betrayal. As Clara spoke, I felt Kate's presence growing stronger, feeding off the revelation, the temperature. Around us dropped until our breath came in white puffs, and the other stranded drivers began moving with that same puppet-like quality I'd seen before. She's going to make us hurt each other, I realized, watching a middle-aged man pick up a tire, iron from his trunk with mechanical precision. No, Clara said, her voice steady despite her fear. She's going to make you choose, save us, or follow her to the end of this journey. Kate doesn't want revenge anymore. Child, she wants what Sarah promised her 200 years ago. The fog began to lift, revealing the full scope of Kate's influence. Every person on that stretch of highway was moving now, walking toward us with weapons improvised from their vehicles' tire irons, broken bottles, anything sharp or heavy. Their faces were blank, their eyes reflecting a malevolent intelligence that wasn't their own. Choose, Evelyn Bell, Kate's voice commanded, coming from the throats of dozens of people simultaneously. Come with me willingly to Chicago, and I'll spare them. Fight me, and watch them tear each other apart. I looked at Clara, at the approaching crowd of possessed innocents, and made the hardest decision of my life. I got back in my rental car and drove away, leaving them standing in the dissipating fog. Behind me, I heard Kate's laughter, and when I checked my rearview mirror, the possessed drivers were walking back to their vehicles as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth now. Kate wasn't just seeking revenge, she was seeking escape, and Chicago was her final destination. The last leg of my journey took me through the heart of America, through small towns where Kate's influence seemed to reach. Into every shadow, she was getting stronger, more focused, as if approaching her goal was supercharging her abilities. In truck stops and diners, I watched people freeze mid-conversation when she passed through. In hotel rooms, mirrors showed reflections that moved independently, and faucets ran blood-red water that cleared the moment I looked away. Marcus met me at the edge of Chicago, his equipment registering electromagnetic anomalies that stretched for miles around the city. She's not just attached to you anymore, he said, studying his readings with growing alarm. The entire downtown area is saturated with supernatural energy. It's like she's preparing for something massive. She is, I told him. Kate wants to leave me, but she needs to find the right host first. Someone with stronger Bell blood than mine. We drove into the city together, Marcus documenting everything while I tried to prepare for what I knew would be our final confrontation. Kate had been unusually quiet during the last part of the drive, but her presence was stronger than ever. A weight on my shoulders that grew heavier with each mile. The Chicago Transit Authority's subway system sprawled beneath the city like a circulatory system, carrying millions of people through tunnels that echoed with the sounds of modern life. But when we descended into the State Street station, those sounds became muffled, distorted, as if we were hearing them through water. The thermal readings are off the charts, Marcus murmured, checking his equipment. It's like winter down here. He was right. Our breath misted in the air despite the warm October evening above ground. The platform was crowded with commuters. But something was wrong with the scene. People stood too still, their conversations too quiet, their movements too controlled. That's when I saw her. The little girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old, standing alone near the edge of the platform. She was wearing a blue dress that looked decades out of style, and her dark hair hung in ringlets that reminded me of old photographs. But it was her eyes that made my blood freeze. They were old, ancient, filled with a knowledge no child should possess. Evelyn, she called out in a voice that was hers and Kate's at once. Come meet your niece, Abigail Abby Bell, my brother's daughter. The one family member I deliberately avoided contacting during this nightmare journey. Somehow, Kate had brought her here, used her influence to draw the most vulnerable Bell descendant to this underground meeting place. Let her go, I said, pushing through the crowd of eerily still commuters. She's just a child. She's perfect, Kate replied through Abby's mouth. Young enough to shape, strong enough in the blood to hold me for another century. She'd do what Sarah couldn't carry me into the modern world. Around us, the subway platform had taken on the quality of a dream. The fluorescent lights flickered in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with malevolent energy. The other passengers remained frozen in place, living statues arranged to witness this final act of a 200-year-old drama. But then I noticed something that changed everything. Officer Joel Ramirez, a Chicago Transit police officer who'd been investigating reports of unusual incidents in the subway system. Unlike the other frozen commuters, he was still moving, still aware, his hand resting on his service weapon as he watched the scene unfold. Officer, I called out, you can see what's happening, can't you? Ramirez nodded grimly. Been tracking strange reports all week. People found standing catatonic on platforms. Witnesses describing voices that come from empty tunnels. You're Evelyn Bell, aren't you? DR, Grady called ahead. Kate's laughter filled the tunnel, echoing off the tile walls. A policeman. How delightfully modern. Tell me, Officer Ramirez, do you believe in justice? In punishment for crimes that span centuries? Through Abby's mouth, Kate began to tell her story, not the sanitized version found in history books, but the raw truth of betrayal and abandonment. Sarah Bell had been more than Kate's host. She'd been her friend, perhaps the only person to show Kate kindness in decades of haunting the Bell farm. When Sarah promised to take Kate with her to a new life in the West, Kate had believed her, had trusted her, but Sarah's escape plan required leaving Kate behind, trapped by the same rituals that had originally bound her to the Bell property. The infant Sarah sacrificed her own daughter had been Kate's anchor, the final component in a spell designed to keep the witch imprisoned forever. She used me. Kate whispered through Abby's voice, tears streaming down the child's face. Used my trust, my loneliness, my desperate hope for freedom, and when she was done, she abandoned me to an eternity of isolation. I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected, sympathy for the creature that had tormented me across half the country. Kate wasn't just a malevolent spirit. She was a victim, trapped and betrayed, driven to centuries of revenge by a pain that had never been allowed to heal. I understand, I said, kneeling down to Abby's eye level. Sarah hurt you. She broke her promise and left you alone, but taking. Abby won't fix that. It won't bring Sarah back or undo what she did. The lights flickered more violently, and the frozen commuters began to sway like wheat in a wind only they could feel. Kate's rage was building. 2 centuries of accumulated fury reaching a crescendo in this underground cathedral of modern life. Then what would you have me do? Kate screamed through my niece's throat. Fade away? Accept that there's no justice for what was done to me? That's when Officer Ramirez stepped forward, his voice cutting through Kate's anguish with surprising gentleness. There's another way, he said. Justice doesn't always mean revenge. He'd been listening to our conversation, but more than that, he'd been studying the paranormal reports in his files. Joel Ramirez was one of those rare individuals who saw patterns where others saw only coincidence, and he'd pieced together something that even Marcus had missed. The Bell Witch case was documented by multiple witnesses. He continued, Andrew Jackson, Dr. George Hobson, dozens of local residents. Their testimonies are part of the historical record. What Sarah did to you, the betrayal, the abandoned promise, the sacrifice of her own child, it's all documented. The truth is already preserved. Kate's grip on Abby seemed to waver, the child's face flickering between innocence and ancient malice. Documentation is not justice. No, Ramirez agreed, but it's recognition. It's proof that what happened to you was real, that your pain matters, that Sarah's betrayal was a genuine crime. That's the first step toward justice, acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Around us, the frozen commuters began to stir, their puppet-like stillness giving way to natural movement. The supernatural cold was lifting, replaced by the normal warmth of the underground station. Even the lights had stopped their manic flickering. I realized what was happening. Kate was letting go, not just of Abby, but of the crushing weight of rage she'd carried for 2 centuries. The recognition of her suffering, the validation of her pain, was providing something revenge never could: peace. "Will you help me tell the true story?" Kate asked, and for the first time, her voice came not from Abby's mouth, but from the air itself, faint and questioning. "Will you make sure people know what really happened?" I looked at Marcus, who was still, recording everything, his equipment capturing what might be the most important paranormal evidence ever documented. Then I looked at Officer Ramirez, who nodded his encouragement, and finally at Abby, who was herself again confused and frightened, but unharmed. "Yes," I said to the empty air, "I'll tell your story, Kate, the real story. I'll make sure people know about Sarah's betrayal and your centuries of suffering. You'll be remembered not as a monster, but as a victim seeking justice." The temperature in the tunnel rose to normal, and the last traces of supernatural energy faded from Marcus's instruments. Kate Batts, the Bell Witch, was finally at peace. Her 200-year journey of rage and loneliness finally at an end. But her story was just beginning. 6 months later, I published the Bell Witch's last journey in 3 major paranormal research journals. The article, supported by Marcus's documentation and Officer Ramirez's police reports, presented a radically different view of one of America's most famous hauntings. Kate wasn't the malevolent spirit of folklore. She was a victim of betrayal, a being driven to extremes by centuries of isolation and pain. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Historians began re-examining the original Bell Witch case, looking for evidence of Sarah Bell's escape and the ritual sacrifice that had trapped Kate. Genealogists traced the Bell family lines, documenting the spread of descendants across the country. Most importantly, psychologists and paranormal researchers began developing new theories about the nature of supernatural entities, suggesting that many evil spirits might actually be victims in need of understanding rather than exorcism. I returned to Adams, Tennessee, one last time to visit the old Bell farm. The house was still there, still weathered and abandoned, but it felt different, lighter, somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from the property. I walked through the rooms where Kate had first manifested, where generations of Bell descendants had lived in fear of her presence. But she was gone now, truly gone, her spirit finally at rest. In the master bedroom, I found something I hadn't noticed during my first visit: a child's dress, small and blue, folded neatly in an old trunk. It was the same dress Abby had been wearing in the subway station, the same style Kate had appeared in during her manifestations. I understood then that Kate had never been the monster people believed her to be. She'd been a child herself when she first attached to the Bell family, a young spirit seeking companionship and understanding. Sarah's betrayal had twisted that innocent need into something darker, but underneath the rage and vengeance, Kate had remained what she'd always been, a lonely child who just wanted someone to care about her story. I kept the dress, and it sits in my office now as I write, a reminder that the truth is often more complex than the legends we tell. Kate Batts got her justice in the end, not through revenge or violence, but through recognition and understanding. Her story became part of the historical record, her pain acknowledged, her truth preserved, and sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows through my apartment windows, I think I can hear her voice one last time, not angry or threatening, but grateful. Grateful that someone finally listened, finally understood, finally told her story the way it needed to be told. The Bell Witch's last journey wasn't about revenge after all. It was about finding peace, and in the end, that made all the difference.